Hello, friends, and welcome to the amazing world of English literature. We are discussing various texts from English textbooks, and today we are going to discuss this poem called A Funny Man from your Class 7 textbook, Purvi. So, here's the poem first, and then we'll go on to discuss the various nuances and the meaning of the poem. So, A Funny Man. One day, a funny kind of man came walking down the street. He wore a shoe upon his head and hats upon his feet. He raised the shoe and smiled at me. His manners were polite, but never had I seen before such a funny sounding sight. He said, "Allow me to present your highness with a rose." And taking out a currant bun, he held it to my nose. I staggered back against the wall, and then I answered, "Well, I never saw such a rose with a funny looking smell." He then began to sing a song and sat down on the ground. You never heard in all your life such a funny feeling sound. "My friend, why do you wear two hats upon your feet?" He turned the other way about and hopped home on his head. So, friends, that was the poem A Funny Man by Natalie Jones. So, let us go through the poem line by line now and figure out its meaning. One day, a funny kind of man came walking down the street. He wore a shoe upon his head and hats upon his feet. The poet says a funny kind of man. So, there is foregrounding that the person being mentioned is funny. And this word, as you will see, will keep repeating throughout the poem. He wore a shoe upon his head and hat upon his feet, which is unusual for somebody to wear a shoe upon his head, which should be worn on the feet, and hats, obviously, which should be on the head, are upon the feet. So, this transgression is something which goes beyond our expectation or opposite of our expectation, creates a funny situation. So, there are two kinds of funny situations that are created, either through exaggeration, as you would have seen in various cartoons, that things are exaggerated, somebody's head is exaggerated, body parts are exaggerated, or their speech is exaggerated. That's how a funny situation is created, or when the world is upside down. So, children, this thing has to be kept in mind that humor is always at a cost, but the cost should always be ourselves. We should learn how to um, make fun of ourselves, laugh, have the ability to laugh at ourselves and not at others. And this is called clean humor, what we are seeing in this poem. There are other kinds of humor which is at other people's cost, stereotyping them, casting aspersions. So this poem is different, and it also tells you the kind of humor that we should endorse. Let's see the next stanza. He raised the shoe and smiled at me. His manners were polite, but never had I seen before such a funny sounding sight. So let's look at these lines. He raises his shoe and smiles, and his manners are polite. There's a blending. There's an unusual world in which the shoe is raised instead of the hat, which is unsettling for us, but his manners are polite, and so which creates the fun element, the humor in it. And then the poet says, "But never had I seen before such a funny sounding sight." Now, what is funny over here is a sight does not sound. What you see is not sound. But the poet juxtaposes, mixes up the two words, sound and sight, sounding a funny sounding sight, which makes it funny in itself because you do not expect the word sounding, the adjective sounding with sight. And so this is how Natalie Jones is able to create humor in it by constantly repeating the word funny and also by mixing up, blending words which are do not go with each other, sound and sight, for example. Let's see the next stanza. He said, "Allow me to present your highness with a rose." And taking out a currant bun, he held it to my nose. So the funny man approaches the narrator. We also have to understand that the poet and the narrator are different. The poet is somebody who has written the poem, but here the one who is narrating the story is a character, and the two are interacting. there's a dialogue that is happening between them. So the funny man says to the narrator, "Allow me to present your highness with a rose." And so we expect that the funny man, the clown, the joker, is going to present the narrator with a rose. But instead, what happens is he takes out a currant bun and held it to my nose. So as we can see, the inversion that has been happening so far, you hold a rose to the nose for smell, but here what is being done? A currant bun. What is a currant bun? A currant is dried grapes or similar fruits which are dried and then they are put in a bun. This is an English delicacy. And so the unexpectedness of things that you do not expect are happening to you, which is what makes it funny. And this is what is the trick of the clowns, to do things which are unexpected. The narrator says, "I staggered back against the wall." So the narrator, of course, is taken aback. She doesn't know what to do because instead of a rose, there's a bun in her nose. And then I answered, "Well, I never saw a rose with such a funny looking smell." See what has happened again is the poet has used the word funny again, as well as you see what happened in the previous stanza, sounding sight. Here looking and smell are juxtaposed together. What smells does not look. These are two different senses. And again, by belying our expectations, by a funny smelling smell, by a funny odorific smell, instead of that, the poet uses funny looking smell, which creates the humor in language. And so one has to be sensitive to how language is used, and the more you use it, the better you are able to navigate through it. It's like a game. He then began to sing a song and then sat down on the ground. You never heard in all your life such a funny feeling sound. So what happens? The narrator asks about the currant bun, and instead, what does the funny man do? Begins to sing a song. He does not answer the question. This is again not expected. So the narrator says, "You never heard in all your life such a funny feeling sound." So the song, as we also get to know, is a funny song, and a sound does not feel, it sounds. Again, the repetition of the word funny and sound juxtaposed with feel. So these are unexpected uses, and they're not wrong uses. These are just unexpected uses of language which create the humor. And then the narrator says, the clown, the funny man, "My friend, why do you wear two hats upon your feet?" So, of course, the narrator is baffled. Instead of wearing the hat on the head, the hat are on the feet like shoes. He turned the other way about and hopped home on his head. So instead of answering the question of the narrator, the clown, the funny man, simply turns the other way around and hops home on his head because the shoe is on his head. That's how the poem ends. That instead of answering why he's wearing hats on his feet, he turns upside down and, like a spring, hops home. That's where the poem ends. So it's a series of funny incidents that the narrator encounters with this very interesting person, and that is what the poem is about. Now, oftentimes we think what the message of the poem is. Such a poem is called a nonsense poem, but nonsense does not mean that it does not make any sense. It makes a lot of sense, but not in the way we understand the world. So one of the messages of the poem is that we should be imaginative, and we should think of the world also upside down. We should have different perspectives to different things. There can be people who could walk on their heads, and this is the element of science fiction, for example. We imagine a lot of things for the future and they come true. What we need to understand is that there is a flavor to language which is to be understood for its own sake, and there is humor in inversion, in seeing the world upside down, and that's also a beautiful point of view. And curiosities always engage us. The other side of the world which we do not know or which we cannot understand always makes us curious. It's also about that. So this is what the poem is about. Now, friends, let us discuss the various literary features of this poem. First of all, there is alliteration, like sounding sight. And it's your job now to find out various alliterative phrases in the poem. Alliteration is repetition of the same consonant sound. Sounding sight, green grass, lemony lemon, avalanche of avocados, and so on. Another literary feature in this poem is repetition. You saw how frequently the word funny came, and I also emphasized on it that by repeating funny man, funny sounding sight, funny feeling smell, and so on, foregrounds the funniness of the poem. There's also something called blending, which we saw, where politeness is mixed with nonsense. Like the funny man takes off his shoe and bows down. So bowing down is polite, and instead of the hat, there's shoe. So there's nonsense, and that brings comical effect. Now, what are the comic situations? For a recap, he offers a rose. He says that I'll offer your highness a rose, but he actually offers a currant bun. Now, also, just to digress a little bit over here, the pronunciation of currant, C-U-R-R-A-N-T, is the same as C-U-R-R-E-N-T. Current is dried fruit, like I told you, and current is wave or electric current. And such words are known as homophones. Phones is from phonetics, listening. So something which sounds the same in listening, but is different in orthography, in writing, and has a different meaning. Now, senses are also mixed, as I emphasized throughout the explanation, like funny looking, smell, funny feeling, sound. And also, the interesting thing about the poem is that the funny man responds to questions with absurd actions. Instead of answering, he just hops home on his head. He inverts first and hops home on his head. Also, another interesting feature is the response by the clown, by the funny man, to questions with absurd actions. For example, he hops home on his head when the narrator asks why he's wearing hats on his feet. Responding to questions with strange actions also creates humor. Now, let us look at some grammatically interesting portions of the poem. One is the phrasal verb. Phrasal verbs are where the verbs are paired with either an adverb or a preposition to create a new meaningful phrase. For example, walking down, taking out, sat down. They may not essentially mean the same as the verb. For example, taking out does not mean taking. So he was taken out means he was eliminated, for example. So the definition of a phrasal verb is a verb combined with a preposition or an adverb, sometimes both, that creates a meaning different from the original verb. Phrasal verbs are very common in English, in everyday speech, and it demonstrates how combinations of words can create new meanings. So these were the various aspects of the poem Funny Man. Hope you enjoyed the poem Funny Man and it was as funny to you as the man himself was. Thank you for joining us, and I'll be back very soon with another poem, another chapter. Until then, keep smiling with the Funny Man. Namaskar.